Hey guys, welcome to my stream. My name is Bizarre Bryn. If you're new here, it's probably because I met you over the weekend and told you to watch me on Twitch. I'm sorry about that, but only a little bit sorry. It's a nice place. The chat friends are really cool. The book is really cool. The people are really cool. Everything is good. Everything is cool. I'm pretty cool. So, stuff and things. What is going on is I'm really into the band Coheed and Cambria. All of their albums coincide with comic books. And then for one of their albums in 2010, instead of releasing a comic book, they released a prequel to all the comics in a novel, and the novel was called Year of the Black Rainbow. So that's what we're doing. We're reading a book. We're reading a book by a rock band, and we're ready. We're ready for the nonsense that's about to ensue. I don't know what's going to happen. Just for anybody who's new here, I've never read this book before, and this isn't rehearsed. So there's a lot of pauses, and sometimes I don't know how to read. So you just have to get on board with that. And here we are. I brought in a sound guy today. I have a sound friend here. Sound buddy. No Name Maddox is actually in the physical room with me. He just doesn't want to be on camera. So he might have a Technicolor Dreamcoat. I don't really know what Ryan looks like, other than in the same general description as all of the other mages. They kind of have gray skin, grayish blue skin, and they got shoulder horns, and most of them are bald. I don't think Ryan is bald, because new mages are allowed to have individuality, whereas classic mages weren't. We talked about that in an earlier chapter. You're just going to have to watch the VODs and learn it for yourself. He's just Ken. He's not Ken. He'd be a terrifying Ken. He's got a leaky chin. Prosimium, I'm not sure if you heard that from last chapter. They were describing Wilhelm Ryan, and they described it as a leaky, veiny chin, and I laughed at it. Even when I read it in the serious voice, I laughed at it, because I don't know if that adjective has multiple meanings, or if it just means he's got like a oozy, wet chin. Right? Does that adjective? You're an English major. Tell me about words. Tell me what those words mean.
For the audience who does not know, Professor Simeon is my human father. So if you hear me yelling at Pro Simeon more intensely than other people, it's because it's my dad.
Sorry to dox you like that, Pro. But I don't think you were here in last chapter, so when I started giggling at the word leaky, I had nothing to go off of. Where was my research team? Leaky, veiny chin, also known as the broken blood vessels or spider veins, that capillaries have been broken and dilated too much. They appear as fine red lines. They're from wood pattern. Usually harmless. I like that better than thinking that he had an oozy chin. I didn't want to think of Wilhelm Ryan as consistently moist. That was less good. Anyway, let's stop talking about that jerk. He's a butt face with a leaky chin. The priests seem cool. They're kind of like if the Borg were all ladies and had imagination. And they're constantly interpreting the voice of God. So, I like the priests. I wonder if, I do know that they're going to come back, but I don't know if they're going to come back in the book and in what, I know where they appear in this, okay, I kind of know where they appear in the songs and kind of in the comics, but again, I haven't actually read the comics. I've only skimmed through them and seen them in passing. I am excited about the priest because it sounds like Paranoia is going to talk to Doctor Hohenberger, and I don't know how that's going to work. Is she just going to appear to him and be like, BAM! This is the voice of God! I think we should do chapter 7. I'm excited to see what Dr. Hohenberger does. I'm nervous, not nervous, maybe nervous? I don't know what the right emotion is. I have anticipation for how the whole priest talking to Hohenberger about what he's supposed to do. Anyway, it was a lot. So everything is simpler now. Chapter 7. Year of the Black Rainbow by Claudio Sanchez and Peter David. Chapter 7. Give us the monster. Mayo Deftinwolf was not scared. Mayo Deftinwolf was never scared. The most extreme reaction he ever had was to be disconcerted. He was, at this point, mildly disconcerted. On the other hand, he was in a situation where other men would likely have wet themselves, so his reaction was reflective of his enormous level of self-possession. Aside from Ryan himself, none was allowed in the high tower save for Deftinwolf. He took advantage of that privilege now, striding up the stairs with full confidence. Never for a moment did he consider the possibility that Wilhelm Ryan would not know what to do or how to react. Many lifetimes of service on Ryan's behalf had left him secure in the knowledge that there was nothing Ryan and he could not handle. What was mildly disconcerting, though, was this. The Mage Wars had turned out, beat for beat, exactly as Ryan had told Deftinwolf they would. Ryan had analyzed every aspect of the mage's behavior. He had anticipated every single move that the mages would embark upon. There was no time at any point in the wars that the mages did anything that Ryan had not allowed for and prepared for. As devoted as he was to Ryan, even Deftinwolf was flat out amazed at the sheer accuracy of Ryan's predictions. It wasn't as if Ryan had any sort of psychic ability. Instead, Ryan had told him all clues came from history. One does not need to be able to know the future. One only needs to be conversant with the past in order to guide the present, and the future will attend to itself, Ryan had said. The problem, the mages being as long-lived as they were, was that they had fallen into consistent patterns of behavior. Those patterns had made them easy picking for Ryan's uncanny ability to extrapolate their next move in every situation by looking at what they had done in the past. Thus, had he been able to dispose of them handily in the course of the wars. He was further confident that his scrutinizing of history would serve him in good stead insofar as his aspirations to greatness. He knew full well the unfortunate fate that had befallen the first Supreme Tri-Mage. Ryan was sure, however, that he would not share that fate, because I learned from history, and will therefore know what mistakes to avoid. So Deftinwolf was fully accustomed to everything that they encountered being anticipated by Ryan. Ryan would then confer with Deftinwolf, who would suggest the most efficient ways in which the matter would be addressed. Ryan would nod in satisfaction, talk yet again of how vital Deftinwolf was in the great causes that were being pursued, and send the general off with his blessing, which was why Deftinwolf was mildly disconcerted. He was quite certain that nowhere in all the discussions with Ryan at any point had there been any mention made of a black rainbow appearing out of nowhere, with apparently not the slightest intention of disappearing any time soon. It seemed to hang there in the sky, taunting and defiant. Deftinwolf saw it as a symbol of the limits of his and Ryan's power, just how far they could go, and no further in their endeavors, because what the hell was Deftinwolf supposed to do about a black damned rainbow? Shoot it? Blow it up? Conquer it? He reached the highest point of the tower and yet hesitated before entering. He was uncertain of the protocol, for this was still a relatively new environment. He raised his fist to knock, not tentatively because he did nothing tentatively. Before he could do so, Ryan's voice called from within. "You may enter." Deftinwolf did so. He stopped and looked around. He had never been in this chamber before, and he hadn't been quite certain what he would see. He certainly had not been expecting to see this himself. That wasn't the first thing that struck him about the room. The first thing that hit him was the cold. That was reflective of the rest of the House Atlantic. Wilhelm Ryan liked to keep it cold. The moment Deftinwolf entered the place, he felt chilled nearly to the bone. As he walked through the vast hallways of the House Atlantic, past cavernous, high-ceilinged rooms that could seat 1,000 people with room to spare, he had noticed many of the servants were wrapped in heavy clothing to compensate. Glittering chandeliers hung overhead, and he could have sworn that they had frost on them. He had figured that the higher up he went, the warmer it would become, since the heat tended to rise. But he was wrong. The room at the top of the high tower was so chilled that he had to flex his hand a few times to keep from losing feeling in his fingers. He opened his mouth, and mist floated from it. It was one of the smaller rooms he had seen in his walk around House Atlantic. Then again, since Ryan was intended to be the sole occupant, how large did it need to be? The floor was simple, unadorned black and white tile, and domed ceiling was clear, providing an unobstructed view of the skies. Furthermore, the room was entirely lined with gleaming metal shined to such a high polish that there were at least half a dozen images of him surrounding them. There were naturally multiple images of Ryan as well. He was standing in the middle of the room, his arms folded, invisible beneath his cloak. His silvery skin, typically out of place in broad daylight, looked remarkably well suited for the icy quarters. Ryan had clearly made this his natural habitat. Deftinwolf paused to gather himself and stepped forward. All business. "Sir," he said, "there is a situation about which—" The Black Rainbow. Deftinwolf was relieved. It was good to know that Ryan was ahead of him on the subject. It made the situation more palatable. He bowed slightly. "Yes, sir, the Black Rainbow." He paused and then said, with just the slightest touch of hope, "Is it your doing?" "No," Ryan said slowly. "No, it is not." "I see. A trick of the mages, perhaps?" "The mages are either dead or incubating. How would you propose that one of them might be behind it?" "Obviously, they could not be." Inwardly, Deftinwolf smiled. This was typical of the give and take between the General and the Supreme Tri-Mage. They both knew that each of them had considered all aspects of the situation. They were now simply, through their back and forth, peeling away all of the layers so that the conclusions they had already come to would be laid bare. "It would have to be the priests, then, would it not? Only they would be capable of placing such an image in the sky." "For what purpose?" "To sow discord, sir, to cause confusion and unrest, to make the people believe that it is somehow some manner of sign from on high that God disapproves of what has transpired." "Or that he approves?" "The faithful are willing to put forward that argument as well. There are some who—" "Or that he is issuing me a challenge." "Yes, I suppose." Deftinwolf's voice trailed off as he suddenly began to comprehend what Ryan was implying. "Sir, are you suggesting that—" "That it truly is a symbol from God? That the Maker, the Almighty, the beginning and the end of all that is and ever was and ever will be, has placed a sign across the firmament that is intended to say to me, 'Very well, Ryan, you have triumphed over all who opposed you. There is only one challenge left to you that is worthy, and I am it. Come against me, little man, for I shall destroy you as casually as one would crush a nettlesome insect.'" He smiled, and that was a terrible thing to see. "No, my dear General, I am not suggesting that. I firmly believe it. What are you seeing in the sky is nothing less than God himself acknowledging that I have caught his attention." Deftinwolf processed that information. His initial concerns had been well-founded. Ryan had definitely never mentioned anything about catching God's notice, much less having the Almighty throw down a gauntlet. The General was daunted by the prospect of squaring off against the Creator. He was willing to follow Ryan into the gates of hell, much less into the maw of heaven. Still— "With all respect, sir, may I ask, is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's merely another challenge, General." "If it is a challenge to you, sir, then it is one I intend to join you in fighting and winning." "And the prospect of battling the Almighty is not one that you find daunting?" "I think of it more as that the Almighty is battling us. He puts on a good show." And Deftinwolf nodded in the general direction of the Black Rainbow. "But if he had it within his ability to dispose you, then he surely could have and would have done so by now. It has generally been my philosophy that warnings are for the weak. The strong do not issue warnings. The strong strike quickly, efficiently, and with no mercy. The fact that God, if such there be, is holding back from doing so speaks volumes to me." "And it does to me. I am pleased we are on the same side in this, General." "Always, sir. May I ask how precisely you intend to rise to this challenge? Tell me against whom to fight, and I'll do so. Where shall I send my troops?" "Nowhere." Nowhere? "This is precisely what our opponent desires you to do, General," Ryan said patiently. "He seeks to distract us from our current plans, send us running about, trying to come up with some manner of direct opposition. Except you said it yourself. Were he of a mind, or more importantly, of the ability to hinder us, then he would do more than put on a celestial light show. He would strike me down with a bolt of lightning from on high." He spread wide his arms, threw back his head, and called out in a challenging voice, "Do it! Do more than try to instill fear with your black rainbow, all-seeing, all-knowing. Know this. If you wish to stop me, then do it now. A blast of energy that even I could not withstand, or abolish me in a burst of spontaneous combustion. I, Wilhelm Ryan, Supreme Trimage, cordially invite you to take your best shot. He waited. Nothing happened. He smiled. As he did so, a stream of gel-like pus oozed from an earthworm-like vein below his left jawbone. Okay. Mayo had become accustomed to such things and took no notice of it. For the time being, he said calmly, we shall carry on as we were, General. And if your men seem the least bit daunted over the notion that we have somehow earned the wrath of God, tell them... Yes, sir? Tell them that his wrath is distant and irrelevant, and mine is right here. It will have very immediate impact. Deftinwolf bowed deeply. Very good, sir. He pivoted on his heel and walked out, leaving Wilhelm Ryan looking heavenward. Slender windows lined the upper dome, and the black rainbow was visible through them. Very good indeed, said Ryan, with a contented purr. ... I'm still figuring out Deftinwolf's voice. I don't know what he sounds like. I don't know if he sounds confused or if he sounds confident. Right now he just has generic dude voice, I guess. So now we're still in chapter 7. Leonard Hohenberger was terrified. These days, Leonard Hohenberger felt as if he was always terrified. Once his constant companions had been his wife and his son. Now it was fear. Lousy, stinking fear that filled every atom of his being. Furthermore, he was tired of feeling this way. It was exhausting, being constantly suffused with fear. He would never have guessed that constant fear could take so much out of you, but apparently that was the case. These days, Pearl and Leonard might well have been living in two different houses. She once again retreated into herself, although only partway. She no longer sat about one step above catatonia. Instead, she focused on three things. First, upon her beloved insects in general, and then the syringa in particular. She would stand in the greenhouse for hours on end, with her hand extended as the delicate green-winged creature fluttered about. Some days she neglected to bother with the gloves that she once regarded as imperative, needing to feel the direct connection with the one thing she still had in control. The syringa would land on her finger and simply sit there, stretching its wings like a gossamer drawing taut and loosening again. She would watch it from beneath her protective mask, and on the occasions that Leonard would look in on her, he saw her standing so motionlessly that the insects might have mistaken her for a tree. Second, she would sit in front of the vid screen and intently watch the news, which was carefully controlled by the government, endeavoring to shield the citizenry from anything that could be considered upsetting. The intent was to put forward as positive an image of the world and Ryan's control of it as possible. These days, though, that goal had become increasingly problematic. It was impossible to put a happy, sunny face on the insanity that had occurred in Apathy Central, the capital city of Apathy Prime. Not that the news reports didn't try. They spoke of the jubilation over the ascension by Wilhelm Ryan. Jubilation? Hohenberger thought. How can they call it that? Hundreds of people injured, drunken insanity and violence, behavior so appalling, it's almost as if we've abrogated the right to call ourselves human beings anymore. Thank God we were nowhere near it. Thank God we lived far away from the maddening crowds. Leonard Hohenberger had never been as glad as he was now that their home and laboratory occupied a sizable spread off in a fairly remote area surrounded by forests, low mountains, and nothing resembling the hand of man. The highest structures in the vicinity were towering trees, providing shelter and shade. He remembered the days when Joseph would scramble fearlessly upon the branches, and Pearl would have to cry out to him not to climb too high for fear that he might... You should never have let him head off into the city. He was fine as long as his activities were limited to video chats with his pals. You should have kept him here, where he was safe. The words kept banging around in his skull, and by this point he honestly could not tell whether they were Pearl's sentiments or his own. The news reporters talked endlessly of how Ryan said he wanted to work closely with the government to bring a new spirit of cooperation and order to Heaven's fence. Hohenberger was completely certain that Ryan had never said anything of the kind. He didn't give a damn about the government or the concerns of the people. He cared about himself. and about his desire for power. And that was the extent of his concerns. The news also made passing reference to an unusual astronomical phenomenon that had intrigued scientists and theologians alike. They called it the Black Rainbow. Hohenberger watched in bleak amusement as the on-screen spelling went from being lowercase to capitalized in the course of the news cycle, and were fully confident that it would be gone within a few hours. Pearl was certain that it would not be. That was the third thing that occupied her, the Black Rainbow. She would sit outside and stare at it whenever she wasn't with her insects, watching vids, or sleeping. Those are her three occupations these days. Pearl didn't sit in a chair. She would simply curl her legs under herself and sit on the ground gazing skyward. During the day, she would watch it shimmering. During the night, she would look up at the swath of stars that were no longer visible due to the huge, black, curving arc. "It's Ryan's doing," she said the first time she gazed upon the Black Rainbow. "Are you sure?" He was relieved that she seemed willing to engage in a discussion that was of scientific or even philosophic bent. "There are some who say—" "I know what some are saying," she said sharply. "Wild pronouncements that God threw that up there as a sign of an oncoming apocalypse, not to be confused with those people who assert that God put it up there to voice his approval of Ryan's triumph. You can't truly buy into any of that bullshit, can you, Leonard?" Bullshit? The last time Hohenberger had heard Pearl swear, it was while Joseph was being born, and it was certainly understandable at the time. Now it seemed uncharacteristic. "You don't actually believe there's a God after everything we've been through, do you? I mean, you're not one of those deluded fools who tries to put a coat of gloss over every tragedy that befalls them by cheerfully declaring it's all part of God's plan. One of those types that refuses to believe the world is a cold and heartless and hopeless, are you?" The question stunned Hohenberger. He tried to frame a response, but it didn't come readily to him. As far as Pearl was concerned, it didn't matter. She wasn't waiting for him to reply. She was talking as much to herself as she was to him. "We're scientists. Scientists should know better than to think that there's some invisible sky magician looking down upon us, like some benevolent mother or father figure. Or, even more likely, a vast unseen bully who visits disaster upon us whenever he's bored. Who could possibly contemplate worshipping such a vindictive, spiteful creature?" "Pearl," he finally found his voice, "look at the world in which we exist. Look at heaven's fence, the manner in which it's constructed, the keywork, all of it. You cannot seriously believe that all these worlds, for God's sake, pardon the expression, it's a perfect triangle. You cannot think that it just happened to develop that way, that there wasn't some designing mind behind it. So what if it's a perfect triangle? Planets are perfect spheres. Human beings are symmetrical for the most part. Designs evolve from nature in order to achieve full functionality and maximum potential. That doesn't automatically equate with the notion that there is an architect above it all, rendering that design on some cosmic blueprint and then physically producing it, just to watch it all go to hell." "Pearl, don't you think that—" She whirled on him. "Where was he for my son? Where was that cosmic motherfucker when my son's life was spilling out onto the street? Where was he then, when Ryan launched his crusade and thousands upon thousands died? Where the hell was he? I'll tell you where he was, Leonard. He never was. Or if he ever was, then he is long dead now and no longer a consideration. That," she pointed toward the Black Rainbow, "is nothing more than a trick conjured up by Wilhelm Ryan to celebrate his own greatness and to scare the crap out of people. And if you think I'm going to be one of those terrified masses who looks up at it and trembles in fear of the almighty Ryan, or even the almighty himself, then you can just forget it. You know why? I don't have any fear anymore. I've got nothing except my hatred for Wilhelm Ryan, every weak-willed, soft-headed, incompetent mage who wasn't able to stop that freak in his tracks. And if you don't look up and see anything except the supreme tri-mage laughing down at you, then you are quite simply not the intelligent man I thought you were, and no different than any of those other powerless assholes who did nothing to stop him." She stood there, her fist balled, her body trembling. Then, her rage seemingly spent, she turned from him and stormed away into the greenhouse. He heard the door bang from behind him. There was the shattering of glass, followed by a loud, "God damn it! Do you want me to—" He started to offer tentatively. "Leave it alone! Leave me alone! Just—" Her voice trailed off, punctuated by a broken sob. Hohenberger covered his face. He wanted to cry or scream or react in some manner, but he couldn't. He felt drained of emotion. He kept telling himself eventually that the full impact of the past days would fully sink in and that he would be able to release his pent-up frustrations. But part of him wondered if he wasn't just kidding himself, if he was, in fact, dead inside, thanks to all that had happened, and that this emptiness was all he was ever going to feel, ever again. Hell, what if everything Pearl said turned out to be right? Of course, proving a negative was always problematic, so it was hard to believe that establishing once and for all that there was no God could ever be done definitely. But if it were possible, would Leonard even mind at this point? Would he truly care if he and Pearl, if man meant nothing in the scheme of the universe? He needed to get out. He needed to get away from his home, his lab, the greenhouse, and this clearly insane creature who had taken up residence in his wife's body. He needed to regain control over something, anything at this point. There was only one place for him to go. He fled the house and ran, and then walked a mile to the glade. The glade wasn't particularly distinctive. There were any number of spots like it in the forest, but Joseph has always been fond of that one place, saying that the particular way that the light flittered through those branches was unique. Plus, there was a sizable rock, a boulder that he liked to sit on and just daydream. He called the glade Inspiration Hideout, claiming that he had his best ideas there. It was where Leonard and Pearl had laid their son to rest. Typically, this was not something that local officials would have approved of, but there was so much more going on in the world that it simply wasn't the sort of thing they had time to worry about. Besides, Hohenberger certainly had enough, as he liked to call them, high friends in low places. His reputation as a scientist was formidable enough, and the money he had made from various medical breakthroughs, which were now in common usage throughout Heaven's Fence, had earned him both money and the right to be left to his own devices whenever possible. What that boiled down to was, it was his son, and he could bury him wherever he saw fit. No headstone had been necessary. Instead, he had carved Joseph's name into the boulder that he had so enjoyed sitting upon. Leonard sat perched upon the rock, running his fingers gently over the indentation that was his son's name. "Hey, Joey," he said softly, is what he called him when he was a little boy. When he reached the ripe old age of 8, he had loudly declared that Joey was a baby name, and that henceforth he will be addressed as Joseph. His parents had exchanged patient glances, shrugged in unison, and had called him that from then on, with the occasional slip-up, receiving a scowl and a remonstration from their very determined youngster. He drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I don't know what to do, Joey. Your mom, she's hurting so much, and I don't have the words to help her or make her feel better. Maybe I should just back off and let time do the job? Except if you build something from clay and just leave it out in the heat, it becomes hardened. And I'm worried that your mother, that she's going to become permanently what she is right now. That the fire of her anger is just going to bake her into something hard. The whole world's gone crazy, Joey. It killed you, and it's killing your mom. And I don't have any answers." He flopped backwards onto the rock, his arms splayed to either side. His eyes were dams, a few blinks away from overflowing. He stared heavenward, stared up at the black rainbow, wondering if it was God or Ryan or something else entirely, and came to realize that he didn't care. His son was dead, and that's all that mattered. His son was dead, and whether the rainbow was God's disapproval or Ryan's symbol of triumph, that was irrelevant. His son was still dead, and Wilhelm Ryan was still responsible for it. "And the most terrifying thing," he said, as if still talking to his son, "is that we might take solace in the idea that this is the end of it. Now that he's won, it's all over, except this is probably the beginning. All of this was just a warm-up for whatever Ryan's schemes take him next. A man like Ryan, he doesn't conquer just for its own sake. He's always looking to the next level, and it's horrifying to think that of what that next level is going to be. Considering what he's done so far, I fear that..." He hesitated, trying to steady his voice. It was a sign of how much Hohenberger felt it needed to be in control that he actually stopped and composed himself, even though there was no one else around. "I'm afraid of what is to come. I'm afraid of what is going to happen to Pearl. I'm afraid of what is going to happen to the world, to the worlds, and more than anything, I'm afraid that I'm going to spend the rest of my life feeling like this, of feeling helpless, and..." "Fear not, your time for fear is done." Hohenberger was so startled that he twisted around to see the source of the voice and tumbled off the rock. He hit the ground, lying on the plot of dirt under which his son was lying. Leonard wasn't thinking about that, though, because the voice was nothing like anything he'd ever heard. It was like the jingling of bells, of 1,000 chimes, yet as ephemeral as the rustling of a butterfly's wings. On the ground, he raised his eyes towards the speaker, and instantly he covered them again. "Why are you doing that?" There was the faintest hint of amused curiosity in the voice. His throat was constricting as if it had too much blood in it. I've heard that to look upon. To see our faces to die? Yes. You're a scientist. Are you going to take the words of others when personal discovery beckons? Slowly, very slowly, Hohenberger looked up toward the being who had appeared from nowhere before him. It was a priest, exactly as had been described in all of literature. She floated there, unconcerned about her nakedness, suffused in a soft blue glow. Her wings were gently beating, keeping her elevated. The only thing approaching a garment was a tiara upon her head that glittered in the light. Is my face that terrifying a thing to behold, that you are going to die as a result? That is to say, he paused and then said, No, it's not. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I imagine it is. You have been chosen, Leonard Hohenberger. For what? To stand against Wilhelm Ryan. Isn't it? And I say this with all respect. He was having trouble keeping his gaze focused upon her face. His eyes wanted to take in all of her beautiful body, and it was with conscious effort that he resisted. Isn't it a little late for that? It is never too late to do what is right. But he's won. Ryan has won. He's conquered the mages. He's taken control of all 12 sectors. What else is there for him to accomplish that he can be stopped at? Do you truly wish to do nothing and thus learn the answer to that question? He considered that, looking inward rather than at her. No, my God, no. Sparked by the mention of the name, he looked back up at her. Is God responsible for the Black Rainbow? That is yet another question to which you do not truly wish to learn the answer. Now, ask of me the only question that matters. He was afraid to, and he knew why. She represented hope, something that was in short supply these days. Between the death of his son and the rage against Ryan that was devouring his wife, he desperately wanted to believe that the priest represented a means of rising up against him. But what if it was false hope? How much more disappointment could he endure before it crushed him completely? And yet he asked the question, what can I do? I'm just one man. That is more than sufficient if the one man is the right man. And that's me? Despite the confidence in the priest's voice and the glory of her presence, he was still dubious. I'm the right man? You are the only man. And what am I supposed to do? You will create a ground force, a force of such overwhelming strength that it will stop Wilhelm Ryan in his tracks. Really? It was an understatement to say that Leonard was skeptical of the concept. Yes, really, and it is to be done with absolute secrecy. Ryan must not know that this is being done, or he will stop the project before it can come to fruition. And how precisely am I going to accomplish this project? Am I going to pull 100,000 men out of my... He suddenly looked down, embarrassed, not wanting to finish the sentence out of respect for the celestial creature that had appeared before him. Ass? Is that the word you were searching for? He thought he heard a slight increase in the tinkling sound that might very well have been barely restrained laughter. Then it faded. You will find that quality trumps quantity. You will not require 100,000 men to accomplish this goal. How many then? 3. He had to choke back a laugh, utterly convinced that she had been joking. 3? 3 against Ryan's hordes? Yes, but they will not be any ordinary 3. You will create them, and they will possess abilities beyond human ken, beyond even the ken of Wilhelm Ryan. Create them? Leonard could scarcely contemplate what she was suggesting. Are you talking about ACG? Artificial cellular generation? With all respect, miss, do you have a name? Yes, but it is not for you to speak. All right, Miss Priest. Look, yes, I've done things with ACG more than anyone else. I've used it to grow skin grafts, organ replacements, and fractures. I've improvised the healing time of sustained fractures, small things that have been boons to medical science and improved the overall quality of life. But you're talking about, I don't know, about growing human beings from scratch and presumably imbuing them with abilities that will make them formidable enough to take down Wilhelm Ryan. That is correct. With all possible respect, Miss Priest, that is beyond my abilities. Even if I could fashion clones or splice enough genes to fashion a human being, it would take as much time to grow such a creature as any other human being, unless you're suggesting we wait 20, 30 years. You do not have that sort of time. You'll have to expedite the growth process. But I don't know how. Yes, you do. All you require is the creative spark. I don't... She glided forward, and Hohenberger wanted to fall back, to scramble away from her, to run as fast as possible. Instead, he was paralyzed on the ground, and he could not determine for the life of him whether she was somehow holding him there with the power of her mind, or if he was simply just too terrified to move. The priest reached down toward him, extending her index finger, and she touched his forehead. A jolt, like a burst of electricity, leaped from her finger into his temple. He cried out, which immediately shamed him. To the best of his knowledge, this was the first time in recent history, perhaps in any history, where a member of the priest had interacted in this manner with the mere human, and rather than embrace the moment, he cried out in terror. What sort of sense of discovery was that? Think of it as a divine spark, she said gently, and suddenly, just like that, all fears and doubts went away. Formulae leaped into his head, and it wasn't as if the priest had placed them there. She had been correct about that. They had been present the entire time. They had simply been floating around in different parts of his brain, and he had never made those connections before. It was like having several different destinations in mind, and he had just been handed the road map so that he knew how to travel from one point to the other. Of course, he whispered. Oh my God, of course. I've been an idiot, a complete idiot. How could I not have seen it? How? It is clear now? Of course it's clear. He wasn't bothering to look at her. He was too absorbed in the concepts thundering through him. This is going to get technical. It's all in the TP523, the synthetic 23 amino acid peptide I developed for the fracture healing. I can use the TP523 to modulate expression levels of proteins that are primarily involved in the functional categories of cell growth. It would be a sort of anti-cancer, except it would involve healthy cells instead of cancerous ones. The TP523 could hyperaccelerate the cell growth. Not only that, but the resulting creations would be functionally indestructible. Their cell replacement velocity would be so rapid that they could overcome any injury short of decapitation. But speed of their creation will still be an issue. Perhaps an artificial bone structure? Yes, that could make blood distribution even more efficient, especially if I could craft a techno-organic metal that... Abruptly, he remembered that he was not alone. Except he was. There was no sign of the priest. Leonard was even beginning to wonder if she had in fact ever been there in the first place. It didn't matter. He had other things on his mind. He burst into his home and Pearl was waiting for him. She was standing there in the middle of the living room, like a statue. He had no idea how long she had been waiting for him. He felt as if he needed to say something. Anything. Pearl, every night I pray to God that you can rest. Seeing what this has done to you, it hurts me more than any man can bear. I'd give you anything, everything, if only I knew you'd take it. She walked slowly toward him, and he braced himself for more anger or accusations or to have the words he'd just spoken thrown back in his face. Instead, she took his hand, and he trembled and let out a sigh as she did so. I hate everything I'm becoming, she said. This hand, and she squeezed his. This hurt. My heart. I'm flirting with disaster. Please, let's just take it a second at a time. He did as she asked, then, holding her tightly, so hard that he had to back off, lest he break her. Then he looked down at her and said, You were right. Ryan has to be taken down, and I'm the one who's going to do it. He then gently set her aside. Even so, she almost lost her footing and caught herself against the wall at the last moment. She watched him head toward his laboratory, and she wondered what the hell had just happened. Her husband would have been in no position to tell her. By the end of the day, the presence of the priest would be little more than a distant memory for him. By the following morning, even that would be gone. And he would only know that while he had been in Joseph's thoughtful place, inspiration had struck. And now, he was preparing to strike as well. It's getting so exciting. That's the end of chapter 7, by the way. I feel like this week didn't end on as epic of a note as last week did, but I'm okay with that. But this week was way more emotional. There was a bajillion, like, last week, it's a lot. So the first week, it was very action-y. And some feelings. And then last week, there was, like, a lot of backstory and some feelings and a lot of action. And then this week is just feelings. We're all having feelings. Wilhelm Ryan is having feelings of excellence in challenging God, and the priests are having feelings of confusion amongst each other and what they're supposed to do, and Pearl is losing her mind, reasonably so. Like, I completely understand why Pearl is so upset. Hohenberger is also upset, but he's dealing with his feelings in the man way. Oh, and apparently all the mages are incubating? So things I wanted to mention, for the month of May 2024, we're actually going to do the reading streaming on Tuesday nights. Tuesday, we're going to keep it at 8:30 because I think that 8:30 is a completely reasonable time to read nighttime books. So I hope that works for everybody. If it doesn't, sucks to suck. I will post about it on my Instagram, so go ahead and follow me on Instagram if you want to. I do post most of my stream updates there, as well as my touring updates. So if you want to see me perform and exhaust myself and drool on myself on stage, then check out my Instagram, because I also post about my public performances on that page. And if you want a sticker, one of these stickers, not one of the shiny ones, then all you have to do is subscribe to the Twitch channel and then hit me up in the DMs with your address, and I'll mail you a sticker. Anyway, I love you guys. Thanks for coming. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next Tuesday, first Tuesday of May, for chapter 8, where we will learn about cellular regeneration and stuff. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you. Okay, bye. I made cue cards. I'm checking my cue cards to remember what I'm supposed to say. One moment, please. That wasn't helpful. My cue card wasn't helpful.